My name is Hannah Lawson. I'm 32 years old, and for most of my life, I've been treated like a disappointment wrapped in polite smiles. You wouldn't know it by looking at me. I have a steady career as an attorney, a small apartment that smells faintly of lavender and late-night coffee, and a calm voice that has learned to hide the storm behind it. But the truth is, every piece of that calm was carved out of chaos, chaos that began inside my own home. My mother, Evelyn Lawson, was the kind of woman people admired from a distance. Perfect hair, perfect posture, perfect reputation. She ran our suburban household like a PR campaign, smiles for the neighbors, strict control behind closed doors. My father was quieter, an accountant with kind eyes who avoided conflict at all costs. I inherited his empathy, though he never used it as armor the way I learned to. Growing up, I understood early that my mother didn't see me as her daughter. She saw me as a reflection. And any imperfection in me was a stain on her mirror. By the time I was 16, I already knew the script she'd written for my life. I was supposed to go to a respectable college, meet a man from a good family, and get married before 25. I was supposed to smile at baby showers, cook for dinner guests, and laugh at jokes I didn't find funny. And when I said I wanted to be a lawyer, her face froze as if I had confessed a crime. "A lawyer?" she repeated, her voice dripping with disbelief. "You want to argue for a living?" "Hannah, men don't marry women who argue. They marry women who listen." I remember staring at her that day, feeling my stomach twist. I was still young, still craving her approval, but a small part of me whispered, "She'll never see you as enough." That whisper never left. College was my first taste of freedom. I studied pre-law, worked part-time, and shared an apartment with two girls who thought my mother's expectations were absurd. For the first time, I laughed without fear of judgment. I started dating, too, but my relationships always seemed shadowed by her voice in my head. "You're too intense," she'd said once when I defended myself in an argument. "You'll scare men away." She was right in a way. The more I learned to stand up for myself, the fewer people stayed. But strangely, I didn't mind. Independence became my comfort. Until my mother found new ways to weaponize it. When I graduated law school, she hosted a celebration dinner. At least, that's what she called it. What it really was a humiliation. She invited relatives, family, friends, even a few of her bridge club members. Halfway through the night, after her third glass of white wine, she stood up with her perfect smile and said, "We're all so proud of Hannah, even though she hasn't found a husband yet. She's been married to her books, you know. We just hope someone will still want her after she's done saving the world." Laughter rippled across the room. I smiled through it, because that's what you do when the person tearing you down is your mother. But inside, something cracked. That was the night I realized my mother didn't just want control. She wanted an audience for it. Years passed. I built my career brick by brick, working long hours in a firm downtown. I specialized in family law, ironically helping people escape the very kind of emotional manipulation I grew up with. Every case I took reminded me of my mother in some way. The wives who whispered, "He makes me feel crazy." The daughters who cried, "She never believed me." I saw pieces of myself in all of them. Still, I kept going home for holidays. Not because I wanted to, but because I thought it was my duty. Because I still believed, deep down, that maybe one day she'd look at me and say she was proud. That day never came. Instead, her cruelty evolved. By the time I turned 30, every family gathering became a stage for her mockery. "Oh, Hannah's always working," she'd say with that saccharine tone. "She doesn't have time for things like relationships. You know, her clock is ticking." Or worse, "She's so smart, but men don't like women who talk too much." It was always said with a smile. Always just a joke. And everyone laughed, because it's easier to laugh than confront the woman who holds the power in the room. I started declining invitations more often. I told myself I was busy, which wasn't a lie. But the real reason was simpler. I couldn't stand being near her. Every word from her was a reminder that I was never going to be enough, no matter how much I achieved. Then came the day that broke me completely. It was a Sunday brunch at my aunt's house. My cousin Emily was engaged, and my mother was basking in the glow of someone else's milestone. I arrived late, hoping to avoid attention, but as soon as I walked in, I heard her voice, sharp, clear, and cutting. "She's 32, Emily," my mother was saying to a group of relatives. "Still single. It's sad, really. She works so much, I think men find her intimidating. Some women just aren't meant for marriage." The word unmarriageable floated through the air like poison. Everyone turned to look at me, their expressions a mix of pity and discomfort. My mother's smile faltered for half a second when she saw me standing there, but she quickly recovered. "Oh, Hannah, we were just talking about how successful you've become," she said sweetly. But it was too late. Something inside me hardened. I excused myself, drove home, and sat in my car for an hour, shaking. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was betrayal. How could your own mother look at you and decide your worth was tied to whether a man wanted you? I didn't speak to her for months after that. And when I finally did, it was only because my father begged me to. "She didn't mean it that way," he said softly, but even he didn't believe the words. Our relationship never recovered. Every conversation became a minefield. Every family event was an opportunity for her to remind me of her disappointment. But life, as it always does, had plans for irony. 2 years later, I got a call from my firm. They were assigning me a high-profile divorce case, a messy one involving a wealthy couple from my hometown. The wife was kind, vulnerable, and terrified. The husband was powerful, arrogant, and ruthless. And the judge presiding over the case? He was one of the most respected in the county, a man known for his integrity and compassion. He also happened to be my mother's new obsession, someone she admired socially, who attended her charity events and shared her last name at dinner tables. She'd been talking about him for months. "Judge Morrison is such a gentleman," she'd gush. "If only you could meet someone like him, Hannah. He has class, presence, and connections." The irony wasn't lost on me when I saw his name on the case file. As I prepared for court, I didn't think about my mother. Not at first. I focused on my client, on strategy, on the facts. But on the morning of the hearing, when I walked into that courtroom and saw my mother sitting in the audience beside a few of her society friends, my stomach dropped. Of course she was there. This was her world, a place to show off her connections, to bask in proximity to power. She didn't know I was part of the case. Not yet. When the bailiff called my name, Attorney Hannah Lawson, the sound echoed like a bell. I stepped forward, head held high, my heels clicking against the marble floor. And that's when I saw it. Her face. Her smile froze. Her eyes widened. For the first time in my life, Evelyn Lawson looked small. I gave her a polite nod before turning toward the bench. "Good morning, Your Honor," I said, my voice steady. "Counsel for the petitioner." In that single moment, everything changed, not because I wanted revenge, but because the truth was louder than her cruelty could ever be. She'd spent years defining me by what I wasn't. And now, in a courtroom filled with her friends and peers, I stood as everything she'd said I could never be. Her humiliation wasn't my goal, but I won't lie, it felt like justice. Still, that day was only the beginning, because the case, the courtroom, and the fallout that followed would reveal just how far my mother's need for control really went. And how, for the first time in my life, I'd have to choose between forgiving her or finally letting her go. When the hearing ended that morning, I walked out of the courtroom with my client beside me. She was trembling, clutching her purse like it was the last thing tethering her to earth. I reassured her quietly, explaining that we had made strong progress, that the judge was fair and attentive. But beneath my calm tone, my pulse was still racing from the moment my name had been called. I could feel my mother's gaze on me the entire time. Even as the crowd shifted and murmured, I knew she hadn't moved. Evelyn Lawson, always poised, always in control, had been caught completely off guard. It was as if she'd just realized her unmarriageable daughter wasn't a child in need of fixing, but a professional commanding the respect of a courtroom. As I gathered my papers, I finally turned toward her. She was standing a few rows back, her friends whispering beside her, their expressions unreadable. My mother's hands were folded tightly around her purse, her jaw set. "Hannah," she said softly, her voice clipped. "I didn't know you were involved in this case." I met her eyes, steady and emotionless. "I didn't know you were attending this hearing." She blinked, visibly uncomfortable. "I was invited by the Morrisons," she said quickly. "You know I do charity work with them. I just came to observe." I nodded once. "Then I hope you found it educational." Her mouth tightened. She wanted to say something, to reassert her control, but for the first time, she couldn't find her footing. Her friends were still nearby, pretending not to listen but hanging on every word. "Well," she finally said, straightening her shoulders. "I suppose congratulations are in order. You've made quite a name for yourself." Her voice faltered on that last line. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. "Thank you," I said simply, gathering my files. "I've worked hard for it." And then I walked away. For once, she didn't call after me. That night, I sat on my apartment balcony with a glass of red wine, staring out at the city lights. The glow of the courthouse still felt imprinted on my skin. My phone buzzed every few minutes, texts from coworkers, my client, even my father, but not from her. A part of me was relieved. Another part of me, the child who used to crave her approval, felt strangely hollow. I tried to shake the thought away. I'd spent years building walls to protect myself from her voice. But now, after seeing her face crumble in public, I felt something unexpected: pity. She had always built her self-worth around perception. The perfect image. The flawless reputation. Watching that image crack today had been satisfying and tragic. Still, satisfaction doesn't erase wounds. 2 days later, I got a call from my father. "She's upset, Hannah," he said quietly. "I think you embarrassed her." I sighed, closing my laptop. "I didn't embarrass her, Dad. I did my job. She showed up uninvited, and she's embarrassed because people saw the truth." There was a pause. I could picture him rubbing his temples, the same way he always did when torn between us. "She didn't expect to see you there. You know how she is about control. Maybe just call her, smooth things over?" "Smooth things over?" I repeated, bitter laughter escaping my throat. "Dad, she's been humiliating me for years. She called me unmarriageable in front of half our relatives. And now I'm supposed to apologize because I exist in the same courtroom she decided to attend for attention?" He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was small. "I just hate when you two fight. It breaks my heart." That part always got to me. He wasn't a bad man, just a conflict-avoidant one. My mother had always used his silence as cover for her cruelty. "I know, Dad," I said softly, "but I'm not fighting her anymore. I'm done." After I hung up, I sat there for a long time, letting the anger fade into exhaustion. The next few weeks passed quickly. The case gained traction in the local news. A wealthy divorce always does, and my firm was proud of the visibility. I tried to stay focused, but whispers followed me everywhere. One afternoon, my paralegal, Jenna, knocked on my office door. "You've got visitors," she said cautiously. Before I could respond, the door opened wider, and my mother walked in. She looked polished, as always, beige coat, pearls, not a hair out of place. But her expression was tight, her eyes darting around my office as if she couldn't quite believe it was real. "This is where you work," she said flatly, taking in the shelves of legal books, the framed degrees, the stack of case files. "It's impressive." I leaned back in my chair. "It's my office, yes. What are you doing here, Mom?" She sat down without being asked. "You embarrassed me," she said quietly. I blinked. "Excuse me?" "At the courthouse," she continued, lowering her voice even though no one else was in the room. "People were talking. They said you made me look foolish. That I didn't even know my own daughter was handling such an important case." "That's not my problem," I said, keeping my tone even. Her eyes flashed. "You think you're so high and mighty now, don't you? Because you have your fancy degree and your little office." "Little?" I repeated, laughing once. "You know what, Mom? You can insult me all you want, but you don't get to twist this. I didn't humiliate you. You humiliated yourself the moment you decided I wasn't good enough for your approval. Her mouth opened, then closed. She wasn't used to me talking back anymore. For a moment, the mask slipped. She looked older, tired even. I just wanted what was best for you, she whispered. No, I said quietly. You wanted what was best for your image. There's a difference. She stood abruptly, her composure cracking. You've become cruel. I shook my head.
No, Mom.
I've become honest. She stared at me for a long moment, her jaw trembling, before finally turning and walking out. The click of her heels faded down the hallway, like the sound of an era ending. After that encounter, something in me shifted. I stopped hoping for reconciliation. I realized that closure doesn't always come in the form of an apology. It comes when you stop needing one. I poured everything into my work. The divorce case became grueling. The husband's legal team was aggressive, manipulative, and condescending. But I thrived under pressure. Each motion I filed, each cross-examination, reminded me of who I had become despite everything. Late one evening, while reviewing documents, my phone buzzed again, this time with an unfamiliar number. I answered cautiously. Hannah Lawson, a man's voice said. Yes. This is Judge Morrison's clerk. The judge asked me to inform you there will be a pretrial meeting tomorrow morning. The opposing counsel requested it. Understood, I said, jotting down the details. After hanging up, I leaned back in my chair. Pretrial meetings weren't unusual, but something about the tone of that call unsettled me. The next morning, I walked into the judge's chambers. The opposing counsel was already there, smug, leaning back in his chair like he owned the place. Judge Morrison entered a moment later, nodding to both of us. But before the meeting began, he said something unexpected. Ms. Lawson, he said carefully, I understand your mother is acquainted with both parties in this case? I froze. Yes, Your Honor. Socially, I believe so. But she is not involved in any way. He nodded. I just wanted to ensure there's no conflict of interest or undue pressure from outside sources. We've received correspondence from her. My heart dropped. From my mother? He handed me a printed letter. I scanned it quickly. It was written in her elegant handwriting, polite, formal, and absolutely mortifying. Your Honor, as a concerned mother and longtime member of this community, I wanted to express my surprise that my daughter is representing Mrs. Calloway. While I'm sure she's competent, I worry about her emotional involvement clouding her judgment. Please consider assigning another attorney for the sake of fairness. I stared at the paper, my hands shaking. Your Honor, I had no knowledge of this, I said firmly. My mother's opinions are her own, and I assure you, my work is entirely professional. Judge Morrison studied me for a moment before nodding. I believe you, Ms. Lawson, but I wanted you to be aware. Families can be complicated. He dismissed the meeting soon after, but I barely heard the rest. My chest was burning. My mother hadn't just humiliated me in private. She had tried to sabotage my career. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat at my kitchen table, staring at that letter, and realized something final had broken between us. This wasn't about misunderstanding anymore. This was about control, about her desperate need to remind me that she could still interfere in my life. But she'd made one mistake. She'd underestimated the woman she raised. Because this time, I wasn't the daughter desperate for approval. I was the woman ready to fight back. And she was about to learn that when you try to silence someone's strength, you only teach them how to roar louder. The weeks after that dinner felt like a slow unraveling of everything I thought I knew about myself. I'd go to work, sit through meetings, nod at my boss, and type numbers into spreadsheets, but inside, something was splintering. Every time someone mentioned family or weddings or home, my chest tightened. I could still hear my mother's laughter, sharp and cruel, echoing in the back of my mind. She's just not the marrying kind. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it didn't matter. But it did. It mattered because she didn't just embarrass me in front of distant relatives. She erased everything I'd fought for, every bit of confidence, every effort to rise above the shy, awkward girl she used to criticize. A few days later, my aunt called. She hesitated before speaking. Mia, she said softly, I didn't want to bring this up, but your mother's been talking. A lot. My grip tightened on my phone. Talking about what? There was a pause.
About you.
About how you spend too much time working, how men find you intimidating, how she's worried no one will want to deal with your personality. My stomach dropped. I closed my eyes, fighting the wave of humiliation. She said that? I thought it was unfair, my aunt continued quickly. You're independent, responsible, kind. She makes it sound like those are bad things. I thanked her for telling me, but after I hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed in silence. I stared at the wall, my chest burning. It wasn't just gossip, it was character assassination, done by the one person who was supposed to protect me. That night, I drove to my parents' house. It was dark, the porch light flickering as if even the house hesitated to welcome me. When my mother opened the door, her expression was perfectly casual, as though she hadn't been shredding my reputation for sport. Mia, she said, smiling faintly. What a surprise. Can we talk? I asked, stepping inside before she could respond. She followed me into the living room, arms crossed. My father was asleep in his recliner, the soft hum of the TV filling the silence between us.
I didn't waste time.
Why are you telling people I'm unmarriageable? Her eyes flicked toward the TV, then back to me.
Oh, that.
Honestly, Mia, you're too sensitive. It was just a joke. I laughed bitterly. A joke? You humiliated me in front of our entire family. You've been spreading it around like gossip at a beauty salon. She sighed, exasperated. You always overreact. Maybe if you weren't so defensive, people wouldn't think. Think what? That I'm unworthy of love. I snapped. My voice trembled despite my best effort to stay calm. You're my mother. You're supposed to believe in me, not tear me apart. Her face hardened. You think I'm tearing you apart? I'm trying to help you. Someone has to tell you the truth before you end up old and alone. I stared at her, stunned. You really believe that, don't you? She shrugged, her tone icy. Reality isn't kind, Mia. Men don't want someone who's always in control, always correcting them, always trying to prove something. I took a step back, the sting of her words hitting deep. You're projecting your own insecurities onto me. Her eyes narrowed. Don't talk to me like a therapist. I'm your mother. For a long moment, we stood there in silence, two women, bound by blood but divided by years of unspoken resentment. I realized then that I'd spent my whole life chasing her approval like it was a finish line that didn't exist. When I finally turned to leave, she called after me. One day you'll understand I was right. But all I could think as I walked out was how wrong she'd always been. A few months passed. I poured myself into work, spending long nights drafting reports, attending client dinners, and taking every opportunity that came my way. I'd been offered a promotion, senior financial analyst, something I'd worked toward for years. But even as my career soared, the bitterness lingered like a shadow. Every family event became an exercise in pretending. My cousins whispered about engagements and wedding dates, and I smiled, nodded, congratulated them. Inside, though, I felt hollow. Because I knew that no matter what I achieved, my mother would always measure my worth by the ring on my finger. One evening, after a particularly draining week, I got a call from a family friend, Mr. Dawson, an older lawyer who'd known me since childhood. He sounded concerned. Mia, he said, your mother asked me to review some property documents with her. She mentioned adding your cousin's name to the deed of her house. Is that true? I blinked.
What?
Why would she do that? He hesitated. She said she doesn't want her unmarried daughter to inherit it, since you don't need the burden of managing property alone. My throat tightened. She said that to you? I thought you should know, he said gently. She's within her rights, but it doesn't feel right. After I hung up, I sat in silence, trembling. It wasn't just words anymore. She was taking action, punishing me for not living the life she expected. I went to her house the next day. My hands were shaking as I knocked. She opened the door, clearly surprised to see me again. You can't be serious about signing the house over to Olivia, I said. She lifted her chin. I can do what I want with my property. Olivia's 20. She can't even pay her phone bill without help. She's married. My mother shot back. She's building a real family, not just collecting paychecks. My voice cracked. So you're cutting me out because I'm single? Her tone turned cold. You've made your choices, Mia. You chose work over love. Don't act shocked when that has consequences. I stared at her, feeling the last threads of respect unravel. You're unbelievable, I whispered. She crossed her arms. You'll thank me one day. But that was the moment something in me snapped, not in anger, but in clarity. I realized she wasn't trying to protect me or guide me. She wanted control. She wanted to be right about me, even if it meant destroying me to prove her point. When I left that day, I promised myself something. I would no longer fight for her approval. I would build a life so stable, so grounded, that her cruelty could never touch it again. The months that followed were a strange mix of healing and quiet determination. I started therapy, something I'd avoided for years out of pride. It helped more than I expected. My therapist, a woman named Dr. Patel, once said something that stuck with me. Sometimes, the people who hurt us most are the ones who are most terrified of being left behind. I thought about that a lot. About how my mother's need to belittle me wasn't just cruelty, it was fear. Fear that I'd outgrow her. Fear that I'd stop needing her. And in a way, she was right. I didn't need her anymore. One afternoon, I got an unexpected call from Mr. Dawson again. His tone was brisk, but tinged with excitement. Mia, I wanted to let you know. I submitted your name for a judicial volunteer position that opened up downtown. They're looking for someone with a strong finance and ethics background. I blinked. A what? He chuckled. A financial oversight volunteer judge. It's a small role at first, but it can lead to something official if you perform well. You'd be perfect for it.
I didn't know what to say.
That's incredible. But are you sure I'm qualified?
More than qualified, he said.
I've watched you work hard. Stay composed under pressure. You deserve recognition. For the first time in months, I felt something warm bloom in my chest. Pride. Genuine pride. I accepted the offer. A few weeks later, I attended my first hearing as an acting volunteer in a local judicial review. It was surreal sitting there, in a crisp black blazer, hair neatly tied back, reviewing case notes as people addressed me respectfully. Judge Harper, they said, and each time, it sent a strange thrill down my spine. I was finally being seen for my competence, my intelligence, my dedication, not my marital status. And yet, fate has a sense of irony. Because just as my life began to align, my mother reappeared in it, in the most unexpected, jaw-dropping way possible. It happened 3 months later. I was presiding over a small financial dispute, a property inheritance conflict between two relatives. When the court clerk called the next case, I glanced down at the file. My breath caught. The plaintiff's name, Margaret Harper. My mother. And the defendant? My cousin Olivia. I froze. The room seemed to tilt. Judge Harper, the clerk said, waiting for me to proceed. I looked up slowly, my voice steady despite the shock thrumming through me. Proceed, I said quietly. When my mother walked in and saw me sitting at the bench, her daughter, the very one she'd called unmarriageable, now the authority presiding over her case, her face drained of color. Her purse slipped from her hand and hit the floor with a thud. The entire courtroom went silent. And in that single, breathless moment, I realized karma didn't always arrive with thunder and fury. Sometimes, it came quietly in the form of a name being called in a courtroom. My name. For a few seconds, no one moved. The air inside the courtroom turned heavy, almost electric. My mother stood frozen near the plaintiff's table, staring at me as though her entire world had tilted. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The faint echo of her purse hitting the floor seemed to stretch endlessly through the silence. I could see every emotion flickering across her face: confusion, disbelief, embarrassment, and something else I hadn't seen before: fear. The same woman who had stood at a family dinner, laughing as she called me unmarriageable, now found herself standing before me, her daughter, in a courtroom where I held the authority. The bailiff cleared his throat gently, and the sound broke the trance. My mother bent down slowly to retrieve her purse, her fingers trembling. She straightened her back and tried to compose herself, but I could see her mask cracking. "Mrs. Harper," I said finally, my tone steady, professional. "You may take your seat." Her eyes darted toward me again, still trying to make sense of what she was seeing. She looked like she wanted to speak, but she said nothing. On the other side of the room, Olivia, my cousin, was already seated. She looked nervous, clutching her lawyer's arm, but when she recognized me, her lips curled into a faint, uneasy smile. I took a slow breath, forcing myself to detach from the moment. This wasn't about revenge. Not yet. This was about control, and after a lifetime of being silenced, dismissed, and humiliated, control was something I wasn't going to lose again. I adjusted my notes and began, my voice even. "This is case number August 14th, 22, concerning a property inheritance dispute between Mrs. Margaret Harper and Ms. Olivia Thomas. Let's proceed." My mother shifted uncomfortably, her knuckles whitening around her purse strap. The attorney representing her stood. "Your Honor," he began, "my client wishes to contest the ownership transfer of a property she had previously signed over to her niece. She claims there was a misunderstanding about the terms of that transfer." I nodded, my pen poised. "Understood. Continue." As the lawyer outlined the details, I kept my expression calm, detached. But inside, I could feel the weight of irony pressing against my ribs. The very property she'd once told me I wasn't fit to manage, the same house she'd proudly signed over to my cousin because I was too independent for family life, was now the center of her legal troubles. When her lawyer finished, I turned to Olivia's side. "Defense." Her attorney, a composed woman in her 40s, stood and replied, "Your Honor, my client maintains that Mrs. Harper willingly transferred ownership and is only seeking to reverse it due to a personal dispute unrelated to the legal agreement." I nodded again, my pen moving smoothly across the page. My gaze flicked toward my mother, who sat stiffly, eyes downcast, pretending to take notes. Every once in a while, she glanced up at me, searching, maybe, for the daughter she used to control. But the woman sitting in front of her now wasn't that daughter anymore. When the hearing adjourned for the day, I stepped down from the bench. The courtroom slowly emptied, the hum of voices fading into the hallway.
I could feel her eyes on me the whole time.
"Mia," she said finally, as I passed by her. Her voice was quiet, uncertain, a tone I had never heard from her before. I stopped, but didn't turn around. "Is this some kind of joke?" she whispered. You're not really." I turned, meeting her gaze squarely. "Judge Harper. That's what they call me here." Her lips parted, but no words came. I gave a small, polite smile. "Have a good day, Mrs. Harper." Then I walked out. Outside, the late afternoon light spilled through the courthouse windows, soft and golden. I stood for a moment on the steps, breathing it in. For the first time in years, I felt powerful. Not vengeful. Not angry. Just calm, the kind of calm that comes when you finally stop trying to prove yourself to the wrong person. That night, though, the emotions I'd buried began to surface again. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea, staring at my reflection in the dark window. I thought about every cruel comment she'd ever made, every time she'd told me I was too much, too serious, too cold. She'd spent my entire life shaping me into something small, something controllable, and when I refused to fit that mold, she tried to destroy me instead. And now she'd destroyed herself. But even as I sat there, part of me still ached. Because no matter how much I wanted to hate her, she was still my mother. And that bond, no matter how broken, still had roots deep in my chest. The next hearing was a week later. I hadn't seen her since that day in court, and part of me hoped she'd withdraw the case entirely. But when I walked into the courtroom, there she was again, dressed more formally this time, sitting straighter, her eyes avoiding mine. The room was tense. Both sides had brought additional paperwork, and the discussion became heated as the lawyers argued over signatures and timelines. At one point, my mother's attorney accused Olivia of manipulation. Olivia's lawyer objected sharply. The noise rose. I slammed my gavel once, the sound slicing through the chaos. Enough, I said, my tone low but firm. This is a court of law, not a family argument. Maintain professionalism or I will adjourn immediately. The room fell silent. Even my mother looked startled by the authority in my voice. We continued, and by the end of the session, it became clear that her claim was weak. The documents she'd signed were legally binding, and Olivia had followed the proper process. Still, my mother refused to let it go. After the session, as I exited through the side hallway reserved for judges, I heard her voice behind me. Mia, wait. I stopped, slowly turned. She hurried up to me, her eyes wild, her tone trembling between pride and desperation. You can't do this to me. I'm not doing anything to you, I said quietly. You're the one who brought this case. You're making me look like a fool, she hissed, glancing around as if afraid someone might overhear. You, sitting up there, acting all superior. I raised an eyebrow. Superior? No, Mother. I earned my place there. You made sure I had to fight for everything, even self-respect. Her jaw tightened. I was trying to prepare you for the real world. No, I said softly. You were trying to make sure I never outgrew yours. Her breath hitched. For a moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Regret, maybe, or shame. But just as quickly, it vanished. You'll regret humiliating me like this, she snapped. I tilted my head slightly. Funny. That's exactly what you said the night you called me unmarriageable. Her face turned red. That was a joke, Mia. No, I said, my voice like steel. It was a warning. You wanted me to believe I wasn't worthy, and maybe for a while I did. But now I see it clearly. You didn't want me to be happy. You wanted me to be dependent. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. I'm your mother. And I'm your daughter, I said evenly. But that doesn't mean you get to define who I am. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the echoing hallway. The case dragged on for another month, but by the time the final hearing arrived, the outcome was inevitable. I was reassigned to another courtroom to avoid a direct conflict of interest, but I still followed the case quietly. When the ruling came down, it was final. The property legally belonged to Olivia. My mother had lost everything she'd tried to protect, all because she couldn't let go of her obsession with control. She didn't show up at the last hearing. But 2 weeks later, she appeared at my apartment. I found her sitting on the front steps, clutching a folder and looking older than I'd ever seen her. When I opened the door, she didn't look up. I wanted to give you this, she said softly, handing me the folder. Inside was a letter, her handwriting looping across the page. I read it standing there in the doorway. Mia, I don't know when I started competing with you. Maybe when I realized you didn't need me anymore. I thought I was protecting you by being tough, by preparing you for disappointment. But all I did was become the source of it. When I saw you in that courtroom, I felt something I can't explain, pride and shame all at once. You were everything I wanted to be, but never had the courage to become.
I was wrong about you.
You are more than marriage or tradition. You are everything I was too afraid to be.
I'm sorry.
I stood there for a long time, the letter trembling in my hands. When I looked up, she was crying, quietly, helplessly. I don't expect you to forgive me, she whispered. But I wanted you to know I finally see you. Something in my chest cracked open. I stepped closer and, without a word, pulled her into a hug. She tensed for a second, then melted into my arms, sobbing softly against my shoulder. It wasn't perfect. It didn't erase the pain or the years of cruelty. But in that moment, I felt something shift, not forgiveness, exactly, but understanding. Because maybe, just maybe, healing didn't always come from winning. Sometimes it came from being seen. As I closed the door that night after she left, I looked at the letter again. The words blurred through my tears, but the last line stood out clearly. You made me proud, Judge Harper. And for the first time in my life, I believed her. After my mother left that night, I sat on the couch for a long time, staring at the folded letter in my hands. The apartment was quiet, the kind of silence that pressed against your ears and made you aware of every breath. The clock on the wall ticked softly, marking time I could no longer feel. I thought about everything. The courtroom, the look on her face when she saw me, the trembling in her voice when she said she was sorry. For so many years, I had dreamed of that moment. I used to imagine what it would sound like if she finally admitted she was wrong, if she looked me in the eyes and said the words I'd been desperate to hear since childhood. "I'm proud of you." And now that it had actually happened, it didn't feel triumphant. It felt fragile, like holding something precious that could crumble if I squeezed too hard. Her apology didn't erase the hurt. It didn't erase the nights I cried myself to sleep after she'd told me no one would ever want me. It didn't erase the way she used to cut me down in front of relatives or how she'd smirk and say, "It's just a joke, Mia. Don't be so sensitive." But beneath all of that pain was something unexpected: relief. Because for the first time, the weight I had been carrying wasn't mine anymore. I set the letter down on the coffee table and exhaled, long and heavy. Then I reached for my phone. There was a text waiting from Olivia. "Hey, I heard about the ruling. Thank you for being fair, even with everything that happened." I smiled faintly. "You didn't need me to be fair. You had the truth on your side." A few seconds later, she replied. "Still, I wanted to say it. Aunt Margaret told the whole family about what happened in court. They were shocked, but some of them actually said they're proud of you." I stared at the message.
Proud.
That word again. It had haunted me for years, living in my mind like a ghost I could never summon or banish. But now it was different. Now it wasn't about seeking approval. It was about being seen for who I truly was, not who I was supposed to be. The next morning I woke up early. The city was still half asleep, wrapped in a cool haze of dawn. I made coffee and sat by the window, watching the first light stretch across the skyline. Something in me had shifted. The anger that had once fueled me was fading, replaced by a quiet sense of closure. But closure, I was beginning to realize, wasn't clean. It wasn't a straight line from pain to peace. It was messy, a looping journey where you circled back to old wounds until one day they stopped bleeding. I thought about calling her.
Just to talk.
But then I hesitated. What would we even say? "Hi, Mom. Thanks for admitting you emotionally destroyed me for most of my life." I sighed and set the phone aside. Maybe not today. Instead, I put on my running shoes and went for a jog. The cold morning air bit at my cheeks as I ran, my breath coming in sharp bursts. Each step felt like a release from the anger, the guilt, the constant need to be perfect. For the first time in years, I wasn't running away from something. I was running towards something myself. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in chambers finishing paperwork when there was a soft knock at the door. "Come in," I called, without looking up. The door opened and a familiar voice said, "You look busy." I glanced up and there she was again. My mother. This time, she looked different.
Smaller somehow.
Not in stature, but in presence. She was dressed simply, a beige sweater, dark jeans, her silver hair pulled back. There was no lipstick, no jewelry. Just her. "I didn't mean to interrupt," she said quietly. I leaned back in my chair, studying her. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to see you." She hesitated, then added, "I didn't know if you'd let me." "I didn't expect you to try," I admitted. She smiled faintly, the corners of her eyes softening. "I've been thinking a lot about what I said, what I did. You were right, Mia. I was trying to make sure you never outgrew me. Because I knew once you did, you'd see the truth, that I was a small, frightened woman pretending to be strong." Her honesty disarmed me. For a moment, I couldn't speak. She took a few tentative steps forward. "When your father left, I told myself I had to be both parents. I thought if I pushed you hard enough, you'd never end up like me, dependent on someone else's approval, broken by someone else's choices." She paused. "But I went too far. I pushed you away instead." I felt something tighten in my throat. "You didn't just push me away, Mom. You made me believe I wasn't worth loving." Her eyes filled with tears. "I know." The silence that followed was thick, almost unbearable. but I didn't fill it. I let her sit with the truth. Then, after what felt like a lifetime, she said, I can't undo it. I can't erase the things I said or the pain I caused. But if there's any part of you that could give me a chance, I'd like to know who my daughter really is now. It was such a simple sentence, but it cracked something open in me. Because all I ever wanted was for her to want to know me. I exhaled slowly. Okay, I said finally. But if we do this, it's going to be on different terms. She nodded. Whatever terms you need. We started small. Coffee on Sundays. Short conversations that tiptoed around the heavy stuff. Work, the weather, my neighbor's loud dog. It was awkward at first. She'd sometimes slip into her old habits, offering unsolicited advice or backhanded compliments. I'd bite back irritation and redirect gently. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was progress. One Sunday, she brought a photo album. The old kind, with peeling plastic covers and fading prints. I found these in the attic, she said, setting it on the table. We flipped through pages of birthdays, graduations, vacations. I looked at a younger version of myself, bright-eyed, always smiling, always trying to please. In one picture, I was 10 years old, holding a science fair trophy. My mom stood beside me, her smile tight and her hand resting on my shoulder. I remembered that day vividly. She'd said, "It's a shame you didn't win first place, but at least you tried." Now, looking at that same image, she whispered, I was so proud that day. I just didn't know how to say it. I turned the page slowly. You could have just said it, I murmured. I know. Her voice cracked. And I'll regret not doing it every day. I looked up at her, then really looked at her. She wasn't the formidable, untouchable woman I grew up fearing. She was human, imperfect, broken in ways that made her hard to love, but not impossible to understand. Something inside me softened. Maybe the real revenge wasn't watching her fall apart in court. Maybe it was letting her see that despite everything she'd done, I'd built a life she could never control, but still be proud of. Months passed, and things began to settle. We didn't become best friends overnight, but the tension started to fade. She attended one of my court ceremonies, quietly in the back row. Afterward, she came up to me, eyes shining. You were incredible, she said. Thank you, I replied softly. She hesitated, then added, I told the woman sitting next to me you were my daughter. That simple statement hit harder than I expected, because for most of my life, she'd been ashamed of me for being too independent, too outspoken, too different. But now she said it with pride. And this time, I believed she meant it. One night, after another long day at work, I got a call from her. Her voice sounded weaker than usual. Mia, she said, I'm not feeling well. Could you come over? By the time I got there, she was sitting on the couch, pale but smiling faintly. I'm okay, she assured me. Just dizzy. Doctor says it's nothing serious. But I wanted to see you. I sat beside her. You scared me. She laughed softly. I used to scare you all the time. Guess it's only fair. I rolled my eyes, but there was affection in the gesture. She took my hand, her grip trembling slightly. If I don't get another chance to say it, I need you to know, I love you, Mia. Always did. I just didn't know how to show it. Tears burned behind my eyes. You just did, I whispered. She squeezed my hand. You made me proud, Judge Harper. I smiled through my tears. And you made me strong. That night, after she fell asleep, I stood by her window and looked out at the stars. The same stars I used to stare at as a kid, wondering if I'd ever be enough for her. Now I realized I always was. She just needed to see it for herself. And she finally did. The day of the hearing arrived like a thunderstorm I'd felt coming for weeks. My heart pounded with every step I took through the courthouse hallway. The smell of disinfectant, the echo of heels against the tile, the shuffle of papers. It all blurred together. My lawyer, a calm woman named Alicia with a tone like warm steel, walked beside me. You ready for this? She asked. I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. Inside the courtroom, my mother sat in the front row with Aunt Sylvia, both dressed like they were attending a social luncheon rather than a legal proceeding. Her hair was coiffed, pearls gleaming against her neck. She didn't look at me when I entered. Not even once. Across the room, her lawyer whispered something to her, and she smirked. That smirk. God. It carried years of belittlement. It was the same smirk she gave when I showed her my first promotion letter, when she called it cute that I was making real money now. I took my seat beside Alicia. My hands trembled slightly, so I clasped them tight in my lap. This case wasn't just about property anymore. It had evolved into a legal reckoning. Documents my mother had forged, lies she'd told about my father's estate, and most of all, her attempt to label me mentally unfit to manage the inheritance he'd left me. That last one cut deepest. She hadn't just called me unmarriageable. She'd called me unstable. The irony? I had the records. I had the truth. When the judge entered, a tall man with a measured gaze and a voice that commanded silence, my mother finally turned to glance at me. Her eyes widened, just for a flicker, when she saw how composed I looked. She must have expected tears or fear. Instead, she saw resolve. The proceedings began. Her lawyer went first, painting a picture of me as an emotionally volatile daughter who'd lost touch with reality. He spoke about episodes, about how I'd isolated from family, how I'd pushed away every good match my mother had suggested. Every sentence was another knife twisting deeper into my chest. And my mother, she nodded solemnly, occasionally dabbing fake tears from her eyes. When it was Alicia's turn, she rose slowly, flipping open a neatly tabbed folder. Her calm was surgical. "Your Honor," she began, "the defense has presented my client as emotionally unstable. Yet, here we have signed, dated, and notarized evidence showing that her mother has been diverting her late father's estate funds for personal use. Furthermore, we have recordings, courtesy of a mutual family friend, where Mrs. Dalton herself admits to fabricating claims about her daughter's mental state." You could have heard a pin drop. My mother's face didn't move for 3 full seconds. Then her fingers twitched. Her jaw flexed. The color drained from her face like water leaking from a cracked vase. The judge adjusted his glasses. "Is that correct, Mrs. Dalton?" My mother didn't speak. Her lawyer began to stammer something about misunderstandings and family disputes, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. Alicia continued, each word precise, deliberate. "We're not here to dissect family disagreements, Your Honor. We're here because a mother tried to strip her adult daughter of her independence and her dignity, using lies." When she sat down, I finally looked up. My mother's eyes met mine. There it was again, that look I'd spent years chasing. Recognition. But this time, it wasn't recognition of love. It was recognition of power, of mine. The judge took a deep breath, looked at the evidence again, then looked at my mother. "Mrs. Dalton, based on what's presented, this court finds ample evidence of financial misconduct and defamation. Ms. Dalton," he said, turning toward me, "you are hereby cleared of all false claims made against you, and your control over your father's estate is fully restored." And then it happened. The moment I'll never forget. He said my name. Ms. Clara Dalton. The sound of it echoed through that courtroom like the opening of a new chapter in my life. My mother's lips parted. For the first time in years, she was speechless. Her face fell, her shoulders slumped, and the realization set in that her narrative, the one she'd spent decades constructing, had just collapsed. Afterward, as people filtered out, I stayed seated. My knees felt weak. Not from fear, but from release. Years of manipulation, belittlement, and gaslighting, all shattered in a single sentence. Alicia placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did good, Clara." I managed a faint smile. "No," I said softly. "We did." Outside the courthouse, the sky was overcast, but it didn't feel heavy. It felt cleansing. The air smelled like rain, and something new. I stood on the courthouse steps, watching cars go by, feeling like I was finally breathing freely. My phone buzzed. It was a message from my mother. I hesitated, then opened it. "Mom, you've humiliated me in front of everyone.
Don't come near me again. I stared at it for a long time.
Then I typed back. Me. I was never the one trying to destroy you. You did that yourself. And then I blocked her number. For weeks after that, I expected the guilt to come. The sadness, the mourning for the relationship that might have been. But it never did. What came instead was peace. I started walking more, running even. I'd stop by my dad's old favorite cafe, order his usual coffee, and just sit there with my thoughts. Sometimes, I imagined what he'd say if he saw all this unfold. He'd probably laugh that quiet, knowing laugh of his and say, "I always knew you had it in you." One afternoon, I went through a box of old family photos. There she was, mom in her 30s, holding me as a baby, smiling genuinely. It broke me for a moment because it reminded me she wasn't always like this. Somewhere along the way, control became her version of love. And I realized I didn't have to hate her to let go. Letting go wasn't forgiveness. It was freedom. But that didn't mean the story was over. A few days later, I received a letter in the mail. It was from my Aunt Sylvia. Inside was a short note. "Your mother isn't taking this well. She says you've ruined her life. But I want you to know, not all of us believed her. Some of us just didn't know how to stand up to her. I'm sorry." For the first time, I saw cracks in the facade. Maybe my mother's hold on the family wasn't as unbreakable as I thought. Still, I didn't reply. I wasn't ready. That night, I stood by my window, city lights twinkling outside, my reflection staring back at me. I saw someone different now, not the girl who cried after every insult, not the woman who tried to earn love from someone incapable of giving it. I saw someone who had walked through fire and come out whole. And yet, deep down, a question lingered. Had I really won? Because victory didn't feel triumphant. It felt quiet. Lonely even. Until one morning, when I received a call from a local women's shelter. They'd heard about my case. Apparently, it had made rounds among legal aid circles. They asked if I'd be willing to come speak to young women who were facing similar family manipulation, those trying to reclaim their voices after years of emotional control. Without hesitating, I said yes. Standing in front of that small group a week later, I told them everything, not to vilify my mother, but to show them what silence costs, what courage restores. And as I spoke, I felt something lift off me. The story that had once chained me now set me free. One girl, maybe 19, asked me through tears, "How do you stop loving someone who keeps hurting you?" I told her the truth. You don't stop loving them. You start loving yourself more. That night, I walked home under a sky full of faint stars. The city was alive, and for once, so was I. But as I reached my building, something unexpected caught my eye. Parked near the entrance was a car I recognized instantly, my mother's. My chest tightened. She was sitting inside, staring straight ahead. Her face looked older, smaller. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then slowly, she rolled down her window. "Clara," she said, her voice trembling. I just wanted to talk." I didn't move closer. I just looked at her. "Why now?" I asked quietly. "Because," she swallowed hard. "You embarrassed me. But you also made me realize something. Maybe I pushed you so hard because I couldn't stand seeing you become something I never could." There were tears in her eyes. Real ones. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel anger. Just sadness. "I don't know if we can ever go back," I said. "But maybe we can start over someday. When you're ready to be honest." She nodded slowly, then drove off. I stood there long after her taillights disappeared, the night air cool against my skin. That was the last time I saw her for months, but it wasn't the end. It was the space between endings and beginnings. And deep down, I knew the final chapter was still waiting to be written. It's strange how peace doesn't come with a bang. It arrives quietly, like morning light creeping through the curtains after a long night of storms. 3 months had passed since that night, since my mother had shown up in her car, trembling between pride and regret. I hadn't heard from her since. No calls. No letters. No surprise visits. Just silence. And in that silence, I began to rebuild myself. I moved into a small, sunlit apartment overlooking the park. Every morning, I'd brew coffee, open the windows, and listen to the city wake up. It was a simple routine, but it grounded me. There was no judgment here, no comparisons, no invisible checklist of what a good daughter or a marriageable woman should be. Just me and the slow, steady rhythm of a new beginning. Sometimes, though, that quiet could turn heavy. I'd find myself staring at the empty chair across from mine, wondering if my mother ever sat in her own kitchen thinking about me, wondering if she missed me, or if she still saw me as the daughter who'd ruined her pride. Then one rainy afternoon, an envelope arrived. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable, my mother's. My fingers trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a short letter, written in careful, deliberate strokes. Clara, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect you to read this. But I need to tell you the truth. When you were born, I was terrified. Your father adored you, and I envied that. I thought love was supposed to make me powerful, but instead, it made me small. I wanted control because I didn't know how to be loved. When he passed, I blamed you because I couldn't bear to blame myself. Every cruel thing I said, every time I told people you weren't enough, it was never really about you. It was about the parts of me I saw in you and hated. You are strong, Clara. Stronger than I ever was. I hope someday you can remember me as something more than what I became. Mom. The letter slipped from my hands. For a long time, I sat there, the rain pattering against the window, my chest aching in a way I hadn't felt in months. She wasn't asking for redemption. She wasn't even justifying herself. For once in her life, my mother was simply honest. That night, I didn't cry. I just let the weight of her words settle somewhere deep inside me. Because maybe, just maybe, she was changing too. Weeks later, I received another call from the women's shelter. They were organizing a new outreach program for daughters of emotionally manipulative families, people who, like me, had spent years trying to earn conditional love. They wanted me to help lead it. I said yes before the coordinator even finished her sentence. Standing there weeks later, in a softly lit community hall, I looked out at the faces of 20 women, some young, some middle-aged, all carrying the same invisible scars. I told them about my story. Not the legal parts, not the scandal. The heart of it. The loneliness, the anger, the moment I realized my mother's cruelty wasn't a reflection of my worth. You don't have to forgive to move forward, I said, my voice steady but gentle. You just have to stop letting their voice drown out your own. One woman, probably in her 40s, whispered, "How did you do it? How did you stop wanting her approval?" I smiled sadly. I didn't stop wanting it. I just stopped needing it. After the session, as the group began to leave, one of the younger girls lingered. She handed me a small folded note and said, "You made me feel like maybe I'm not broken." Inside her note were just 3 words. "You saved me." I stared at it for a long time after she left, because that's when I realized maybe all this pain, all the betrayal, all the heartbreak, it wasn't meaningless. Maybe I went through it so someone else wouldn't have to feel alone in it. A few weeks later, I got another call. This time, from Aunt Sylvia. "She's been in the hospital," Sylvia said quietly. "Nothing serious. Just exhaustion. But she's been asking for you." My chest tightened. Part of me wanted to say no, to protect the fragile peace I'd built. But another part, a softer part, whispered that maybe it was time to close the last open wound. So I went. The hospital room smelled faintly of antiseptic and roses. My mother was lying there, thinner than I remembered, her hair grayer, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her blanket. When she saw me, her eyes widened, and for a moment, she didn't speak. Then, in a voice small and tired, she said, "You came." "I did," I replied softly. She looked away. "I didn't think you would." I almost didn't. Silence hung between us. Then, slowly, she reached out her hand. "You look happy," she whispered. "I wasn't sure you'd ever find that without me." There was no bitterness in her tone, only regret. "I did," I said quietly. "But I also had to lose you to find it." She nodded, eyes glistening. I deserved that. I sat down beside her, unsure what to do with my hands. For years, I'd imagined this moment going differently. Me confronting her, her begging, me refusing. But sitting here now, I didn't feel anger. I just felt tired. I got your letter, I finally said. Her lips quivered. Then you know.
Yes.
I know. Her voice cracked. I don't expect you to forgive me, Clara. I just needed you to know I'm sorry.
For everything.
For calling you names. For making you feel small. For trying to control you when I should have been proud of you. Tears stung my eyes, but I didn't let them fall.
You hurt me, Mom.
More than you'll ever understand. But I think I'm done carrying it now. She reached for my hand, hesitated, and then, to my own surprise, I let her hold it. Her grip was weak, but her thumb brushed against my palm the same way it did when I was a child afraid of thunderstorms. It was strange, after everything, that tiny gesture still held warmth.
We sat like that for a while.
No apologies. No explanations. Just two women bound by blood and broken history, sitting in the same quiet that once separated them. When I left, she whispered something that made me stop at the door. You were never unmarriageable, Clara. I just didn't want to admit you didn't need anyone to complete you. Especially not me. That time I did cry. Weeks passed. My mother was discharged, and though we didn't suddenly become close, we spoke occasionally. Short calls, cautious conversations, learning how to exist without reopening old wounds. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even particularly warm. But it was something. And that something was enough. Months later, the women's shelter held a charity event, and they asked me to give a closing speech. I walked up to the microphone, lights warm against my skin, the room filled with faces of people who'd survived their own versions of betrayal. I took a deep breath and said, when I was younger, my mother told the world I was unmarriageable. She said I was too opinionated, too emotional, too broken. But what she really meant was that I couldn't be controlled. And now I finally understand. Being unmarriageable isn't a curse. It's freedom. The room went still. I smiled, tears glimmering in my eyes. So, to anyone who's ever been told they're too much, too difficult, too different, remember this. They only say that because your strength reminds them of what they lost in themselves. Don't shrink to make them comfortable. Stand tall. You were never too much. They were simply too small. The crowd rose in applause, and in that moment, I felt something shift deep inside me. Not victory. Not revenge. Just peace. Later that night, as I walked home beneath a soft drizzle, I passed a florist's shop closing for the evening. Without thinking, I bought a small bouquet of lilies, my mother's favorite. The next morning, I placed them on her doorstep. No note. No words. Just flowers. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't surrender. It was acknowledgement. A quiet truce between two wounded hearts. As I walked away, the sun began to rise, painting the sky in pale gold. And I realized something beautiful. My story had never been about revenge. It was about release. Because healing isn't loud. It's not a declaration or a dramatic ending. It's a whisper that says, I'm free now. And for the first time in my life, I truly was. The end.